And Jessica, fantastic job as always with the lead in there. And what we're seeing is now we're starting to get a better indication of how good these teams are at this point in the season. We have a little bit more advanced data. So you're going to see teams that were not ranked in last week's poll, they are now ranked this week. You're going to see teams that were ranked really high. Either they fell down quite a few spots or completely fell out of our top 25 poll this week. And that's because we're looking at not just the win loss record, but like Jessica said, we're looking at all phases of the game, your special teams, your offense, your defense, and getting that overall composite score. And that is what makes up the top 25. So let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and get into the top 25 as I have you for the next hour. Coming in at number 25, and this team was ranked 25th last week, and that is the Clemson Tigers. Coming off a 40-14 win at home over Stanford, we had them as a huge favorite in that ball game. So the margin of victory did not really impress us from a data standpoint in that metric. So really good job there by Clemson getting the win, kind of getting things back on track after that week one loss to the Georgia Bulldogs, and now starting to make some waves there in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Coming in at number 24, and they were unranked last week, but off a gritty and gutty win against Arkansas there in Cowboy Stadium in Dallas. We find the Texas A&M Aggies coming in at number 24. Like I said, fantastic job of taking advantage of Arkansas's turnovers in that ball game. Very hard-fought victory there for the Aggies. Aggies have a big-time showdown coming up this weekend against Missouri. We will be featuring that game coming up later this week. Coming in at number 23, and this is a big drop in our polls this week, we find the Rutgers Scarlet Knights coming in at number 23. Folks, we had them rated 8th last week. Now, Rutgers did not lose last week, so why the drop? It's some numbers that are extremely concerning for this team as they were able to get that win Friday night over the Washington Huskies. But what we saw out of Rutgers, they did not control the game. In fact, probably should have lost that game when you look at they gave up over 500 yards of total offense in that ball game, 314 yards passing. And here's the real scary number. They gave up over 207 yards rushing on just 29 attempts. Folks, that's 7.1 yards per carry by your opponent. That is not Big Ten football. Greg Schiano absolutely has to get that corrected extremely quickly if this team wants to contend for a playoff spot. Coming in at number 22, and this team was unranked last weekend, that is the Boise State Broncos. And if you've heard us talk about Boise State, we absolutely love what this team is doing this year. Cannot take away just the performance week in and week out of their talented running back there in Mr. Gentry. Ashton Gentry is just having a fantastic season so far. 82 carries, 845 yards, 10.3 yards per carry. He already has 13 rushing touchdowns. This young man is making a bid not only to get Boise State a playoff bid, but he's making a run at the Heisman Trophy. And if he continues to put up those kind of astronomical numbers, it's going to be hard to keep him out of New York here at the end of the season. Coming in at number 21, the Washington Huskies. We just talked about this team losing last week to Washington, but, and this is a big but, while their record may not be as impressive, we like what we're seeing from this team from an overall standpoint. 3-2 on the season. They have a big game coming up in conference against Michigan this week. But when we look at their I'm sorry, their season thus far, two really close losses by less than 8 points total, losing the Apple Cup to Washington State 24-19, and then that loss last weekend to Rutgers, as I mentioned. But there's a lot to like about this Washington Husky team, and they're led by transfer quarterback Will Rogers. So far, Rogers on the season, 1,354 yards, 10 touchdowns to just no interceptions. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong column there. So 10 touchdowns, no INTs. Great numbers there. We know Rogers is going to take care of the ball from a completion standpoint coming out of that Mike Leach air raid offense. Rogers is completing almost 75% of his passes. So if Washington is able to get a win against Michigan this week, that really will solidify them staying in our top 25. Coming in at number 20, the Ole Miss Rebels, and they were 13th in our poll last week. And the drop was justified when you are a double-digit favorite at home against Kentucky. You did not win the game. That is going to drop you in the polls. There is a lot to be concerned about this Ole Miss team coming out of that game. What's the big concern? Well, it's that secondary, as we talked about, giving up 8.8 yards per pass attempt against Kentucky last week, who has absolutely struggled throwing the ball early on in the season. Ole Miss, horrible on third down conversions in that game against Kentucky, only 1 for 10 in that category. That is not going to get you a lot of wins. And when your defense only allows 20 points in this era of football, as explosive as your offense is supposed to be, you should get a win in that. So do not blame the defensive coordinator, Pete Golding, for that loss. That's all on Lane Kiffin and his offense there. Coming in at number 19, this team also was not ranked last week. That is the Louisville Cardinal. And while they ranked, even though they're coming off that loss in South Bend, it's because they absolutely played extremely well in that contest. They were able to run the ball on Notre Dame, something that teams have not had a lot of success doing this year. 131 yards on 35 carries, 3.7 yards per attempt. So Louisville stuck with the run there. And if it wasn't for those 3 turnovers, Louisville may have come out of South Bend with a win there. So take care of the ball just a little bit better there, Louisville, and you'll definitely stay inside of our top 25. Coming in at number 18, and they are down one spot, and that is the Kansas State Wildcats, an absolute thumping of Oklahoma State. When I talk about a team where there's some issues, Oklahoma State's got more issues than what's being reported in the national media right now. 42-20 is what they absolutely did to Oklahoma State last weekend in that Big 12 showdown, and outscored Oklahoma State in the second half 21-7. So was able to pull away there after intermission. And what did we really love about Kansas State? 34 carries, 300 yards rushing, 8.8 yards per rush attempt. Oklahoma State was allergic to tackling last week. Now, here's the concerning thing if you're a Kansas State fan. 3 of 12 on third down, while Oklahoma State was 6 of 17. Got to get better on first and second down if you're going to improve on third down. Coming in at number 17, they were not ranked last week, but welcome back to the top 25, and that is the USC Trojans. We know what happened the last time we saw USC, and that was blowing a big time matchup there against the Michigan Wolverines. 27-24 was that final. And what we looked at with USC as they're 2-1 on the season so far is the game script, the way they were in control of that game throughout. But here's the problem with USC: that rush defense has got to get better against Michigan, especially when you're talking about a team that could not throw the ball in that ball game. Only had 32 yards passing in the contest, but gave up 290 yards on the ground, 6.3 yards per carry. Southern Cal, this is no longer the Pac-12. You're going to have to play defense, and especially rough rushing defense in this conference if you have any aspirations of continuing to be ranked week in and week out. Coming in at number 16 is the Penn State Nittany Lions. And last week, a big time win over Illinois, winning that contest 21-7. Folks, that game was 14-7 late into this contest. It wasn't until Illinois quarterback Luke Altmaier threw his first INT on the season late in that contest, and Penn State's Katron Allen had a 5-yard touchdown run to push this margin out to 14 points. The game script and some of the key numbers from that contest, Penn State absolutely had a fantastic day of running the ball. Passing game left a lot to be desired. I should say. 15 for 21, only 135 yards, 6.4 yards per attempt. Sorry, Penn State fans, that is just simply not going to be good enough to get it done once you get up against some stiffer competition. Illinois, plagued by 2 turnovers in that ball game, was absolutely the difference in that contest. We just talked about this team coming in at number 15 is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Irish were up 3 spots from last week as they came in to the polls as number 18 last week and was able to get that win against Louisville, as we mentioned. Really, it absolutely came down to turnovers because, honestly, Louisville probably deserved to win that game. Just some costly turnovers in some really bad spots was the difference there for the Fighting Irish. So credit Marcus Freeman and his team for getting that win because they absolutely needed it for their slight playoff hopes to remain alive. Coming in at number 14, and they were up from number 22 last week, and that is the UNLV Running Rebels. We know more than enough about the storylines behind everything that transpired for UNLV this past week. We're not going to dive back into that, but what we saw from this team was a little bit better passing output. The quarterback for UNLV, Halaj Malik Williams, 13 for 16, 182 yards, 11.4 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, no INTs. This young man also chipped in on the ground, going 12 carries, 119 yards, almost 10 yards per carry, and a rushing touchdown. So fantastic job by there, and they absolutely dominated Fresno State, winning that contest 59-14. And honestly, this game was close for 3 quarters, and then that big scoring output in the 4th quarter really pushed this margin out a little bit further than what the game stats excuse me will show. So fantastic job by UNLV head coach Barry Odom, doing a fantastic job. Coming in at number 13 out of the Big 12, and that is BYU and the Cougars are doing a absolutely masterful job as they are up from last week's poll as they came in at number 20 last week. And what can you say about BYU? Is this team good or are they just really dialed into what needs to be done? Last weekend, beating Baylor 34-28. And this is something we're going to talk about with another team in the poll. They were up 31-14 before 31-7 early in that contest before just allowing BYU to get back in the game and make that final score look a lot closer than it probably should have been. BYU should have probably won this game comfortably by 10 or 14 points, but getting the win is all that matters. And BYU absolutely did that. So BYU sits at 5-0 and firmly within our top 25. Coming in at number 12, and they are up from their last week rankings at number 15, and that is the Iowa State Cyclones. Iowa State last week in a shutout win over what may turn out to be one of the worst teams, not only in the Power Four, but in the entire Division 134 teams, and that's the Houston Cougars. This game was an absolute crawl fest for the first three quarters as Iowa State went into the fourth quarter with only a 10-point lead, did score 10 points there in the final quarter to really make this lead look like it was bigger than what it was. And you would think they would have taken advantage a little bit more of the 3 turnovers from Houston. They really didn't. A team that converts over 50% on third down, so you can see they had drives going. They just absolutely stalled out and had to settle for field goal attempts instead of putting touchdowns on the board. That is something that should be concerning to head coach Matt Campbell as we get deeper into conference play. Coming in at number 11, and this team is down 5 spots from last weekend, and that is the Tennessee Volunteers. Want to say a quick hello to my good friends Julie Vols and Matt Locke. You hear me promote their show on all of our different podcast and YouTube channel. They host a fantastic show on 850 The Ticket, Matt Locke and Loaded. And Julie Vols, the reason why your Tennessee Volunteers have slid down just a little bit is that strength of schedule. We talked about it last week. Until Tennessee gets some beef on that schedule, as far as upcoming opponents, Tennessee is going to hover around that 10 to 11 range, but they're going to get Arkansas this weekend, so that's going to be a road conference game. And just kind of taking a quick peek ahead for what's in store for the Tennessee Volunteers in the month of October. The big rivalry game there for Tennessee next weekend against the Florida Gators. And then the third weekend of October, they will welcome in the Crimson Tide of Alabama. So got to make sure you start to take care of business now with future opponents like Alabama on the schedule, like Georgia on the schedule. Tennessee's going to have the opportunity to move up in the polls, but right now you're probably going to hover around that spot right there. Coming in at number 10 again this week, as they were number 10 last week, is the Iowa Hawkeyes. And last weekend, the Hawkeyes had the week off, and given where their strength of schedule was going into that, did not really adjust positive or negative for this team last week. So they're going to hold right there in the number 10 spot. Now, I put this out on our Twitter page at Crunch Time VIP. The biggest surprise of this team being in the top 25 and even so high as being the number 9 team this week, and they were not ranked last week. Did not get any real guesses as far as who this team was. So let's go with that big reveal right now. Coming in at number 9, the James Madison Dukes. That's right, JMU out of the Sun Belt, our highest ranked group of 5 team right now. And you're going to ask the question, why are they ranked so high? Metrically, this team is performing fantastic in every single category. When we look at James Madison's numbers, they have the 3rd best overall offense. Don't believe me? Ask North Carolina about the 70 burger that they put on them last weekend. Or ask Ball State about the 63 burger that they put on them last week. So in their last two games, they've scored a total of 133 points. That's how you have the 3rd best overall offense so far in our metrics. Their defense is ranked 49th. Now, that has a lot to do with that 50 that they gave up against North Carolina a couple of weeks ago. But still, despite giving up that 50, they still have a top 50 defense. And James Madison's special teams, their special teams is the 12th best in our metrics. So getting it done in a lot of areas is what we're seeing from James Madison right now. Coming in at number 8, and that is the Miami Hurricanes. Controversial win? Possibly. I mean, it depends on your viewpoint of that game, but Virginia Tech lost that game by bad clock management from their head coach, Brent Key. So this was a game that Mario Cristobal in years past would have found a way to lose, was able to come out of that with a win. There's no such thing as a ugly win or a pretty loss in these metrics. So good job there by the Hurricanes, staying in our top 25 and moving up, as I said, 3 spots there for the Canes. And when we look at that game against Virginia Tech, some areas of concern, the 3 turnovers, without a doubt. The rush defense, they were out of their rush lanes playing against a very mobile quarterback in Drones there. 32 carries, 206 yards, 6.4 yards per rush attempt is what the Hurricanes allowed against Virginia Tech. Need to button that up a little bit more so going forward, as the Canes will be traveling way across country to take on the Cal Golden Bears in a conference matchup of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Coming in at number 7, and they're down 2 spots, and that is the Georgia Bulldogs, coming off of let's not bear the lead, a horrible performance against Kentucky 2 weeks ago, barely getting out of that game with a win, having the bye week, and absolutely getting blitzed in the first half against Alabama as they went into the half trailing 30-7. Now, a lot of puffed up numbers there in the fourth quarter to actually take the lead before losing on that Milroe to Williams touchdown connection, 75 yards, and good night, put the baby to bed. Now, here's what we said in the podcast breaking down that game, that Georgia could absolutely not run the ball in 2024. Folks, 26 carries, 80 yards, 3.1 yards per carry. That's not Georgia football, and that is not winning football. If this team continues to have an inability to run the ball, this will not be their only loss in the regular season. Now, you're going to look at the numbers for Carson Beck and think he had a phenomenal game. Threw for 439 yards, 8.8 yards per attempt. Folks, he had to throw the ball 50 times to get those numbers. Completed 27% of his passes, so just a tick over 50% completion percentage. And those 3 INTs, backbreakers. So, is it that the offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, does not trust Carson Beck? Or is Carson Beck this year's Matt Leinart from USC from years ago, where he played with a lot of fantastic talent last year, and now he doesn't have that Brock Bowers, that Ladd McConkey really supporting him in the passing game? Is Carson Beck being exposed? Talked to a couple of scouts after this game. Carson Beck, draft stock, not pointing up after that performance. Coming in at number 6 is the Oregon Ducks, and this team moved up 15 spots from last weekend as they came in at the 21 spot. And Oregon starting to get their sea legs, if you will, as they're coming off a impressive win, we'll call it, over UCLA. And when you look at it, they got out to a 28-10 lead at the half and just absolutely cruised on in, only giving up 3 points in the second half. You want to beat these teams that you're better than early and then not take your foot off the gas. Oregon was fantastic on third down conversions against that UCLA defense, 9 for 15, so well over 50% in that metric. And the Oregon defense was just as spectacular. UCLA on third downs, 1 out of 10 conversion. Oregon did a fantastic job of only allowing 172 yards of total offense, 125 passing yards, but UCLA only had 5.2 yards per attempt and 47 yards rushing on 24 carries. Only 2 yards per carry is what this Oregon defense allowed. This was the Oregon defense, and really from an overall team perspective is what we expected. And Dillon Gabriel is 100% healthy now. 31 for 41, 278 yards, 6.8 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, did have the 1 pick. And Jordan James, fantastic running back, 20 carries, 103 yards, 5.2 yards per carry, did have that 1 touchdown against UCLA. Their next conference game is coming up on Friday night as they will welcome in the Michigan State Spartans into Autzen Stadium. Going to be an interesting game coming up on Friday night. Coming in at number 5, and they're down just 1 spot this weekend, and that is the Missouri Tigers. Missouri had the bye week last week, and they were jumped in the polls by a team that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But big time matchup, as we talked about earlier, as Missouri will be heading down to College Station to take on the 4-1 Aggies, as Missouri will come into this contest 4-0 on the season. We'll see if they've made some adjustments to get off to a better start in the first half, and they're going to need to against Texas A&M, as that defense from Texas A&M is still playing tremendous football. Looking forward to doing that breakdown later on in the week. Coming in at number 3, and we have dubbed this team America's team. Coming in at number 4, skipped a team out of the Big Ten, and that is Ohio State. Ohio State, welcome to the party as far as your schedule, because your non-conference schedule was absolutely atrocious. Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall. Come on, Ohio State, you're better than that. You should be playing at least one legitimate non-conference team, and we didn't get that this year. So we criticized Michigan for that last year. We're going to criticize Ohio State for that this year. Now, that is not hurting the Buckeyes in our overall ranking. Did drop a spot from number 3 to number 4 this week, and that's because of that out-of-conference schedule dragging them down just a little bit. They will get a little bit of a pick-me-up this weekend as they will take on our number 10 ranked team, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Hawkeyes come into this game with a 3-1 record. Coming in at number 3, and that is America's team. I jumped the gun. I was so excited to talk about this team. Just almost skipped over Ohio State, and that is the 5-0 Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana is off to one of their best starts in program history. We know that the schedule hasn't been extremely daunting, but they have 2 conference wins already, beating UCLA. They're in Pasadena 42-13. And then getting a home win last weekend over the Maryland Terrapins, winning that contest 42-28. Indiana will square off this weekend against Northwestern as the Wildcats of Northwestern come into that contest 2-2. Indiana has an excellent chance of even coming out of that game still in our top 10. And just a fantastic job by first-year head coach Curt Cignetti. Now, coming in at number 2, and this is where our metrics are truly tested, and that is the Alabama Crimson Tide. They were number 1 in our poll last weekend, and we'll talk about why they're number 2 this week. The big win over Georgia, absolutely. But, and this is a big time but, Alabama absolutely put themselves in a position to lose that game because they did not take care of business in the second half, giving up 27 points in the second half, giving up game control in the second half, and basically giving up the lead. If it wasn't for that big time connection that we talked about earlier, Alabama and Kalen DeBoer are having a very bad week this week. Was able to get it done, Milroe to Williams. So Alabama will sit here this week for us in the number 2 spot. Now, of course, if Alabama's in the 2 spot, you know who's in the number 1 spot. And that will be the Texas Longhorns, coming off of their first ever conference game as a member of the Southeastern Conference, as they get the 35-13 home win over Mississippi State. And this game was a lot closer than what the final score indicated. Going into the fourth quarter, Texas only had a 21-6 lead. So able to get a little bit more margin there in the fourth quarter as they scored 14 points and really push that lead out. Is there some areas of concern there for the Texas Longhorns? Yes, and they're definitely on the defensive side of the ball. Mississippi State, one of the worst teams in the Power Four, was able to convert 8 out of 17 on third down. So just a tick below 50% there. Texas got to fix that defense. Rushing, Mississippi State ran the ball 50 times for 150 yards in that contest. That tells me Texas was not able to get control of this game and force Mississippi State into passing the ball more. That is going to be a concern there for Texas going forward. But right now, the Longhorns will sit as our number one team going into this weekend's games. Let's talk about our top 25 teams in action this week. Number 8, Miami will travel across country to take on the Cal Golden Bears. Number 25, Clemson will travel down to Tallahassee to take on the Florida State Seminoles. We have some quarterback concerns there for Florida State. We'll talk about that a little bit more this weekend as we get some more details. Number 17, USC will travel to the Twin Cities to take on Minnesota. Number 23, Rutgers will travel to Lincoln to take on the Cornhuskers of Nebraska. Number 3, Indiana, aka America's team, will take on Northwestern there on the beautiful lake there right outside of Chicago in Evanston, Illinois. Number 4, Ohio State will welcome in number 10, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Number 6, Oregon will host Michigan State in a big conference game. Also in the Big Ten, number 16, Penn State will host UCLA, another big-time matchup there for the Big Ten. We'll stay right there in the Big Ten as number 21, Washington will play host to the Michigan Wolverines. Number 12, Iowa State will host Baylor in a Big 12 game. Very important for Iowa State not to lose this contest and stay connected there in the Big 12. Boise State, number 22, will host Utah State in a Mountain West showdown. Number 14, UNLV will host the Syracuse Orangemen. That game will be featured on the podcast coming up later this week. Number 7, Georgia, after 2 really bad performances over the last 3 weeks, the Georgia Bulldogs will look to get right as they welcome in the Auburn Tigers to Sanford Stadium there in Athens, Georgia. In a top 25 matchup, the number 5 Missouri Tigers will travel down to College Station to take on the number 24 ranked Texas A&M Aggies. The number 2 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide will be coming into my backyard to take on the Vanderbilt Commodores here in beautiful Music City, aka Nashville, Tennessee. The number 9 James Madison Dukes will head down to Monroe, Louisiana to take on Louisiana Monroe in a big Sun Belt contest. Number 11, Tennessee will travel to Fayetteville to take on the Arkansas Razorbacks as the Razorbacks look to climb back into the polls if they're able to get this big win over the Volunteers. Number 20, Ole Miss will head to Columbia, South Carolina to take on the Gamecocks in a big SEC matchup. And our final game featuring one of our teams in the top 25, number 19, Louisville, in an ACC conference game will take on the SMU Mustangs. Expect a little bit of fireworks in this contest. Our teams that are on a bye this week, number 1, Texas. Number 13, BYU. Number 18, Kansas State. And number 15, Notre Dame on a bye. Some questions that we had coming out of this week's top 25. The first one was, why is Texas number 1 this weekend after Alabama beat a team that we had ranked extremely high in Georgia? Quite simply, the point differential between Texas and Alabama is 9 overall points. So very razor-thin margin, one of the tightest margins we've seen between number 1 and number 2. And here's the difference between Texas and Alabama. So Texas comes in with our ninth best overall offense. Alabama has the 15th best offense. As far as overall defense, Alabama right now has the third best defense. Texas comes in at the fifth best overall ranked defense. And then special teams, here's the big separator. Texas has the third best rankings as far as our overall special teams. Alabama sits at number 13. That is the number one reason why Texas right now has a slight advantage over Alabama as far as the polls go. Now, the next question was, why is Indiana ranked ahead of Ohio State when you had Ohio State number 3 last weekend? And once again, razor thin margin, as Indiana has a 1-point advantage over Ohio State. And when we look at what's dragging Ohio State down, well, both offenses, and you would expect this to be the case, are rated extremely high. Indiana is at number 4. Ohio State is at number 6. As far as the defenses go, now, here's a big differential. Ohio State has the second best overall defense, while Indiana is our 37th best defense. But here's what's dragging Ohio State down. Indiana has the 9th best special teams. Ohio State, 71st at this moment. So Ohio State, your overall special teams has to get better. And I think most rational Ohio State fans could absolutely understand that. When we look at it, they're not getting a lot of return yardage, whether it's kickoff return or punt returns. Have only attempted 2 field goals so far in the season. So that's something that is really kind of dragging that number down just a little bit. So Ohio State, get a little bit stronger there in that metric, and you'll absolutely start to move up back to where you were as far as you were at number 3, could absolutely move back up. When we talk about James Madison coming in at number 9, how is James Madison a top 10 team in our metrics? Well, we talked about it. They have the 4th best overall offense. Talked about the last 2 weekends scoring a combined 133 points there. Their defense, absolutely respectable, with the 21st overall rated defense. Now, special teams is going to drag them down here in the coming weeks, as their special teams is ranked 92nd. And then what's really going to hurt them is that strength of schedule. Right now, we project them to have the 105th toughest schedule in college football. So that will eventually start to eat at that overall point total, and will drag them down in the coming weeks. And then the final question was, which teams were just outside of the top 25 this weekend? So if we look at those teams, number 26 is SMU. Number 27 is the South Carolina Gamecocks, and they have that big game against Ole Miss coming up. Number 28, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Number 29, the Army Black Knights. And then at number 30 is the Pitt Panthers. So those are the 5 teams that sit just outside of our top 25 and will look to get into the top 25 with some big-time performances this coming weekend. Folks, that is our show for this week, and it is always a pleasure to join you each and every week. So on behalf of my team, I want to just say a thank you for whether you're listening to this in podcast form or watching it on YouTube or streaming it on Twitter. Want to say thank you for all the support each and every week from me personally and our entire team. On behalf of our fantastic team, Miss Jessica, who was our host for this podcast, Summer, who is also one of our hosts and just does a fantastic job with the lead in each and every week. Our senior analyst, Billy, who does a great job of setting the lines and getting us ready to dive deep into these matchups. This is Kenneth signing off for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Have a great rest of your week and look out as we will have that upcoming college football featured games of the weekend show coming out extremely soon. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, God bless everybody.